Then on Sports Central, we go over our next schedule preview of this offseason, and it's going to be over the Iowa State Cyclones, team that went 7-6 overall in the 2021 season. Not a bad season for Iowa State, but this team had some high expectations going into last season, so some would say it was a bit of a disappointment of a season, but nonetheless for Iowa State, how will they be next season? That's what we'll be going over here today. We'll be going over the players this team will be losing, who they'll be returning, and also looking at their schedule for the first time this offseason, starting out with your notable games from last season. And this team, 7-6 overall. 7-6 is not a bad record, but this team, if you remember going into last season, this team was expected to be kind of in the 9 to 10, maybe even 11 win range. And rightfully so. The amount of talent that was coming back for this team going into last season was certainly, it looked really good for Iowa State. And this team, though, they performed fairly well over the course of the season. They lost to Iowa in week 2 by 10. That was a tough loss there, and the Hawkeyes really rose in the rankings from there. Lost to Baylor by 2. The Bears turned out to be really good last season. That was a close one there on the road. They beat Kansas State 33-20. Beat Oklahoma State 24-21. That was a huge win there. Oklahoma State was also one of the top teams in the Big 12 last season. Beat Texas 30-7 on November 6th, and they lost to Clemson in their bowl game 13-20. So Iowa State kind of a up and down season. You had some great wins. Oklahoma State, that one was huge. Beating Texas 30-7 was huge. And of course, losing to Clemson, that was a tough loss there. Losing to Baylor by 2, losing to Iowa by 10. So this team was on the losing end of a lot of close losses last year. And that was kind of the theme for this team for a good chunk of the season. But nonetheless, 4-2 in their first 6 games, and then 3-4 in their last 7. Roster preview going into next season, and this team is losing a lot of the experience that they had last season. And that was a big reason why this team was so hyped up going into last season, was the amount of experience that was on this team. They performed really well in 2020, and heading into 2021, this team was returning. Brock Purdy was coming back. Breece Hall was coming back. Purdy had a great season in 2020. Breece Hall was one of the best running backs in the nation in 2020. And in 2021, both players performed reasonably well. Brock Purdy, 3,100 yards, 19 touchdowns, 8 picks. His stats were pretty good, and his completion rate was one of the highest in the nation at 72%. Brock Purdy is definitely a player that shouldn't be underestimated. It was a good season for him overall. Breece Hall, top running back, he's not going to be around next season either. So you're losing Brock Purdy and Breece Hall going into next season. Breece Hall last year, 1,700 yards of offense, 23 touchdowns. Those are some very impressive stats from a running back, and we saw that in 2020 as well. His stats were outstanding in 2020, so it definitely was expected to see him have a good season. But, that's going to be a tough loss there. The backfield, you do return Brock, your second running back, but he only had 200 yards last year in comparison to Breece Hall, who had nearly 1,800. The receiving core, you return your top receiver in Xavier Hutchinson. That's going to be huge. He had over 1,000 yards of offense, 5 touchdowns, so you got some upside there. You do lose your second and third in receiving, and your top 2 tight ends in Charlie Kolar and then Chase Allen. Kolar had just over 750 yards, 6 touchdowns. That's going to be tough. And Chase Allen, of course, last year just over 280 yards and 2 touchdowns. You do return your second wide receiver in Jalen Noel. Last season, he put up just over 250 yards. Didn't have any touchdowns, though. So the receiving core, you do have your top 2 wideouts coming back. The tight end position is going to be taking a couple hits there, though. And, of course, the backfield's got a question mark. The quarterback situation has got a question mark as well. So, you do, on the offensive line, lose 2 on there. You lose 1 defensive lineman, 2 linebackers, and then 1 in the secondary. So you lose 4 starters defensively. So, Iowa State, once again, this team, if any year was going to be this team's year to make the college football playoff, this team had very much, I would say, the talent to make a run at least to the college football playoff, or at least the New Year's Six. This team had tremendous talent, and I hate to bring that up so many times, but it is so true. This team really had tremendous talent last year, so it was kind of a disappointment seeing this team only get 7 wins, but nonetheless, for 7 wins would be an incredible achievement for some teams, so if you take that into consideration too. But nonetheless, this team going into next season will be a bit of a younger team. There is quite a bit of experience being lost this offseason, so kind of a rebuilding season looks like coming up here for Iowa State. But how impactful will those losses be for this team? Brock Purdy, Breece Hall, your top. Those 2 players were outstanding and have been for Iowa State, and so that's going to be obviously tough. But maybe it'll be a good thing to get a new start with the quarterback situation. But, of course, Breece Hall, nonetheless, is going to be clearly a tough loss. So But yeah, the losses will definitely be impactful, and this team shows potential to still maybe have a good season, maybe get up to 7 to 9 wins. But I just don't think this team, with the talent that they have going into next season, some of the inexperience, I just don't know that this team is going to be a big-time contender in the Big 12. But looking at your transfer portal and recruiting, this team is losing a lot to the transfer portal. You do have Colby Reeder coming in, linebacker from Delaware, but otherwise you are losing a lot to the transfer portal. Skates, a receiver's off to Memphis. You got safety Young, who's off to Ole Miss. You got Horn, a linebacker who is off to Florida A&M. And then you're also losing a defensive back Young, offensive tackle and Ramos, and then you got a defensive back King and the defensive lineman Subtle, all that are taking off to unknown locations as of right now. Recruiting-wise, this team is 39th in the nation right now, 6th in the Big 12. So, I mean, your recruiting is okay. I mean, it's nothing too impressive. You got 2 4-stars coming in, the 19 3-stars. So there is some potential there, but recruiting-wise, I mean, it doesn't look bad, but certainly 6th in the Big 12 isn't the best ranking. But for Iowa State, I mean, this team, it's tough to preview them because, I mean, you're losing quite a bit of talent. But let's look at your schedule now going into next season. In this team, you do have, of course, Iowa, that annual non-conference game against them. You got them on the road this season. You start off the season, though, against Southeast Missouri. You got Ohio as well at home on the 17th, Baylor at home on the 24th. You travel to Lawrence to play Kansas on the 1st. You got Kansas State at home on the 8th. Texas on the road, Oklahoma at home, West Virginia at home, and then you got Oklahoma State on the road, Texas Tech at home, and then TCU on the road to finish out your regular season. Looking at the first half of your schedule here, Southeast Missouri, easy win for sure. I'm not too worried about that one. Iowa on the road, that's going to be a tough one. That game is always almost a coin toss. I mean, both teams are very capable of winning that game, and it's only the second game of the season, so it's a crucial matchup in the beginning parts of the season. But I like the Hawkeyes. I mean, even Iowa, I don't expect to be terribly good next season, but I will favor the Hawkeyes right now in that matchup with them being at home, plus Iowa State's inexperience, especially at the beginning of the season. Ohio at home, that's going to be an easy win. Don't expect too much out of the Bearcats. And then you got Baylor. Baylor at home on the 24th. I will favor the Bears in that one. Baylor's looking pretty good going into next season. They had a great season in 2021, and they returned quite a bit of talent going into 2022, so things look pretty good for them. Kansas on the road, easy win. K-State at home, that's a tough one. That's going to be close, but I'm going to go with Iowa State to be favored in that matchup as of right now. But K-State, that team could potentially get 7 to 9 wins next season too, so keep an eye on them. And looking at the second half of the schedule, Texas on the road, I'll favor the Longhorns in that one. With it being on the road plus Texas, I could see that team being a contender in the Big 12. Oklahoma at home on the 27th. I mean, Oklahoma's had some troubles against Iowa State in the past, but I do want to favor the Sooners in that game, although it's going to be close. West Virginia at home, I'm going to favor Iowa State there. Oklahoma State on the road. The Cowboys look pretty good going into next season. They're kind of in a similar situation with Baylor, where, I mean, both Oklahoma State and Baylor had excellent seasons in 2021, and both teams are returning a decent amount of talent for sure going into next season. So, I mean, the Big 12, though, is wide open. There are multiple teams. I could see like 4 different teams winning the conference next season. So I'll favor the Cowboys there. Texas Tech at home on the 19th. I'll favor Iowa State there, and same thing with TCU. We'll favor the Cyclones against TCU on the road. So record projection, 5-7 to 8-4 for this team. Once again, as I mentioned before, I mean, this team, I mean, they got some potential for sure here. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty, that's for sure, with some of the young players that'll be on this roster next season and losing some of that experience. But there is still potential on this team, and I definitely think that Iowa State, I think 5 to 8 wins is definitely reasonable. 5 is kind of that's your floor, meaning that's probably the worst that you could be, and then 8-4 is kind of, I think, the ceiling for this team. So I think 6 to 7 wins is a pretty reasonable range for this team going into next season. I just don't know with the amount of inexperience that'll be on this roster next season that this team can be a big contender in the Big 12. But they potentially could cause an upset or two and make some noise. But that said, let me know your thoughts and comments below on this team, and I appreciate you guys all watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.